What can be better than a Techstrong gang from our studio headquarters in Boca Raton? Coming at you from KubeCon in Salt Lake City. You're watching Techstrong Gang. All right. Hey, everyone. It's Alan Schimmel, and I'm here in Salt Lake City for KubeCon and Techstrong Gang. You know, we have a lot of our gang members here in various places around town here at Salt Lake City. It's a busy KubeCon. I think there's like 24 tracks going on today and more. But Mike Vizard and I are here bringing you a special edition of Techstrong Gang. And happy to do it. We've got some really big news, but I'm going to turn it over to Mike.
Yeah, I would argue we have the biggest news of the entire show. We're launching
platformengineering.com. Look, that's probably a hard URL for you to remember because I hate hard to remember URLs. But it's a little bit of DevOps.com all over again for me, Mike. You know, there's something to be said for a good domain.
It's deja vu all over again.
Did you like that? That was my yogiism. Did they know a yogiism in Salt Lake City?
I don't know, but I think there's a couple of Yankee fans out there that.
All right. That was my yogi. It's deja vu all over again.
So we launched this site off of some research that we did for the DevOps Next project. And one of the things we found there was, and it surprised me, but 61% of respondents said that they were involved in some form of a platform engineering project. Might not be across the entire organization, but they were citing benefits included things like developer productivity, standardization of configurations, reducing costs and reduce complexity, and even improve security were all drivers of this thing. And the numbers weren't very far apart for all 5 of those things. So it seems like there's a big benefit total, and I'm not sure anybody's hanging their hat on one thing, or is it 5 things?
First of all, 61%, not 56. But you did cite the source for that. Yeah. So I'll go with it.
All right.
So, you know, I have a couple of articles up today, one on platformengineering.com, and few of our other sites have other articles geared to them, but around platformengineering.com. You know, not to get all Barack Obama-ish on you, but I've gone through my own evolution.
You have?
On platform engineering. Look, when it first came out, I'll admit it, you know, these guys were, some of the folks in the community were trying to make their bones by saying DevOps is dead and long live platform engineering. You know, I hear that word, trying to make their bones. I was making bones when you were dating cheerleaders, as Mo Green would say. And so immediately I had sort of this anti-platform engineering thing as the publisher of DevOps.com. But over time, I came to realize that that's clickbait marketing stuff. Platform engineering's not here to replace DevOps.com.
No, I don't think that was ever the issue.
No. Well, some people were saying that, but what I think we've seen is what your numbers bear out. And it's not your numbers, it's the research we did in our DevOps Next report, right? DevOps has done amazing things in breaking down silos between dev and ops and bringing security into the whole SDLC, software supply chain security, SBOMs, all these things. It's done amazing things working in a cloud native environment, right? In this whole stack. But it's also put a big burden on developers.
True that.
That whole shift left thing of, yeah, the developer will do it, the developer do. So you're taking your highest paid resource in many cases and putting more non-development work on their plate. And that to me is the reason why platform engineering needs to be. We need to give these developers an environment that allows them to go fast. To me, it's like if these developers are maglev trains, we've got to put in those maglev tracks and guardrails so that they can go as fast as that maglev train can go, right? And that's what platform engineering does. It sets the environment. Now, is it truly new? No. I think a lot of what platform engineering ops folks were already doing, system architects were doing, but it's put it all together in the context of a modern software development life cycle. And I think platform engineering becomes the architect of the new software factory.
I think about it in a similar fashion with some other caveats wrapped around it. I think part of the DevOps revolution was kind of a reaction against the overly rigid centralized IT teams and CIOs that were limiting productivity because people were stuck in these platforms that were not extensible. They couldn't add new tools when they wanted. So developers went out and created their own platforms to go do that and decided they were going to manage that. That, in many regards, to your point, became too much of a good thing
Right.
because then they got saddled with all this stuff that had nothing to do with writing code. I feel like we're trying to find the medium between two extremes now, where we had DevOps shifting everything left and we had CIOs where everything was going to be run from the right-hand side. And I think we can get to some sort of middle here that makes everybody happy, and that's the challenge. It's not easy to do. You got to create everything from internal developer portals and self-service systems around that. So it takes work. The thing I don't know for sure is going to happen yet, and I'd love to get your opinion on this, is how big is this? Because at some point, do we bring together all the IT operations folks so that DevOps and ITSM are all part of the same platform engineering team? I mean, how big can platform engineering get?
So I think you're looking at it wrong in some respect. It's not that platform engineering subsumes all these other things. I think you got to look at it. I'm going to use a big word here. I hope I don't scare you, but you got to look at it as a pantheon of frameworks, of processes, of ways of doing things.
Wait, I see some Greek gods.
Yeah, that was from the Greek. I'm about to take out my Windex here and start squirting. But there's a pantheon that includes platform engineering, that includes DevOps, that does include ITSM, that includes Agile. Maybe it even includes a little waterfall. It includes SRE,
Yeah.
DevSecOps. All of these things are pieces, components of the software factory, of the IT factory that modern organizations need to run at the speed of business today and what customers expect. So it's not that any one of these swallows the other. It's this continuum of these are all the pieces.
I will agree to disagree on this one
Okay.
point because I'm also looking over my shoulder at all this AI stuff. And as I see that coming down the pike, the one thing that's consistent about it is we're looking at the democratization of IT, and it's going to be easier for people to manage more complex systems. And not all of those folks need to be engineers, right? We have armies of IT administrators now who can manage a Kubernetes cluster with the right tool. We have folks who are administrators that may be able to stand something up and apply the patches without being a developer. So I think that there's some room here with this platform engineering thing. I don't, without sounding too much like Kumbaya, might actually bring everything together.
So to me, you're asking the macaroni and spaghetti question, right? All spaghetti is macaroni, but not all macaroni is spaghetti.
Mm-hmm.
Do we get to a point because of AI and things that all platform engineers are engineers, but we don't need engineers to do platform engineering?
I'm not quite saying that. I'm saying that administrators can function like engineers. We'll still need higher end engineers, but we'll never have enough engineers as it currently stands. So we have to elevate the IT administrators to let them manage.
So they become platform engineers.
Yeah, junior platform engineers might be one way I would think about it.
Right, so we can make an official junior platform engineer. That's something I aspire
Get you a
to.
little badge and
Right.
everything.
What do you want to be when you grow up? I want to be a junior platform engineer, sir. Look, it's real. There's a sizable community. I think most of the folks who work around the factory have recognized this now as a real need. I think what we'll see, and I wrote this in one of the articles, I forget which one, on platform engineering, is what effect AI will have across all of these disciples, all these disciplines, excuse me, all of these disciplines. And I think in some ways it'll bring them together. In some ways it'll maybe drive a wedge. I mean, overall, I think it'll be a good thing. But platform engineering is real. That's what I want people to take out of this. Platform engineering is real. It's a real thing that's needed and it's working. I want to talk about the site though. What can people expect at platformengineering.com, Mr. Chief Content Officer?
The site itself, the articles are going to be more thought leadership generated. So there'll be articles from practitioners, IT leaders, folks who are, what are the challenges of implementing all this stuff? I don't think it's going to be so hardcore news driven per se, although there'll be news stories on that site, but it'll be more about let's kind of build a community to have this conversation in the first place, because I continue to stand pat. I believe we're on the cusp of the great convergence here. I think platform engineering, the site, is the place to have that conversation.
Okay. And the site is there to have that conversation. I'll also add to it though, Mike. We'll be doing webinars and Techstrong learning events around platform engineering. Of course, we'll be dedicating some real resources here on Techstrong TV to platform engineering, as well as the family of Techstrong podcasts. We'll be having a platform engineering entree into that. So, I liked, and again, I wrote it in my articles. At Techstrong, we're about busting down silos. See what I did there?
I'm always.
And I think that's what we're going to be doing here with platform engineering, bringing it into the family of Techstrong, with platformengineering.com, bringing it into the family of Techstrong sites, taking its rightful place alongside DevOps.com, Cloud Native Now, Security Boulevard, Techstrong AI, Techstrong ITSM, and of course, Digital CXO.
Yeah. I'm not sure we need to knock down every silo. Silos have a purpose and a platform, and separation of engineering concerns is helpful. But right now, I can't navigate all these silos.
You know what I'm doing right here? I'm ducking so the DevOps gods don't hit me with the lightning they're going to strike you with.
But I think there's a lot of room to bring all these silos together in a much more federated fashion, and I'm looking forward to it.
Fantastic.
Right.
Hey, Mike. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be back. We might have a guest even joining us. You're watching Techstrong, gang.
All right, folks, we're back. And as Alan mentioned, we're at KubeCon, which is one of the biggest gatherings of the open source community, maybe the biggest. It's hard to measure these days. But I kind of feel like every time I look at open source, it's like looking at the best and worst of times. Everybody's having an argument about, gee, we're having an awesome time. And others are saying we're not having an awesome time. And it starts to feel like a Victorian novel in my mind. But
I thought you were going to say it's the U.S. political landscape.
Could be.
It's too soon.
Too soon. All right. Sorry. Too soon.
Well, we got Brian Fox, who's the CTO of Sonatype, joining us for this little chat. And you've been looking at this as long as we have, maybe longer. I mean, what is your sense of what's going on here? Because there's been a lot of high-profile forks.
Yep.
And there's a lot of arguments about the role of vendors in this space. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, without vendors, there's no ecosystem at all, because there needs to be money in this system somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're entering probably a new phase in the maturity curve of open source. I mean, open source is more popular than ever. Everything we use, any piece of software has open source in it these days, and a significant amount of open source. 90% of the code base is often made up of open source components. And so it's more critical than ever. You're seeing increased attacks on the ecosystem, on software in general, on technology in general, and where open source is such a critical foundation of that. By extension, there's a lot of focus on that underpinning. And I think as we move forward, it's going to get worse before it gets better. We're seeing legislation in the EU from the Cyber Resiliency Act, the Product Liability Directive. I think those things are going to cause organizations that are consuming open source to focus on the underpinnings even more. They're going to have higher expectations, which at first might not be welcome. I predict that will become the new norm. But when you think about vendors in open source and some of the forks you mentioned, I think what we're grappling with is the sustainability of some of these things, right? I mean, it's one thing to create a project that is sort of a pet project, solves a problem for you and put it out there and work on it willy-nilly. But you get some of these big, huge open source projects that we see represented at this conference. Those cost real money to produce. I heard a stat, I was at a CISA sponsored thing earlier in the year where they got all the package registries together. And I heard that one of the major database, federated database open source projects, it costs something like $60,000 each time they do a release to run the CI infrastructure. Somebody's paying for that. The open source project's not paying for it. The users of that project are not paying for it. Somebody's kicking in that bill. That party will come to a stop at some point until we unless we figure out the sustainability.
I was a political science major in college. And one of the things they taught us when we looked at modern political theories and systems was that democracy was the best of the worst.
Yeah.
And the same thing I think applies to open source. Yeah, it's not perfect. Yeah, we're running into scalability issues and market issues and government, regulation issues. But there really isn't anything better out there.
No, I think that's a
right?
perfect analogy. It's not great, but
it's the best of the
worst.
It's
better than closed source in most dimensions for sure.
So if you have something better, let's hear it. But if not, let's just try to make this the best it can be.
Yeah.
And I think just like in democracy, there's a bit of a cha-cha, one step forward, two steps back kind of thing. Mm-hmm. There is fits and starts.
Yeah.
And stops, but through it all you learn and you progress, and I think that's what we're seeing.
Not all democracies are the same though, and some of them are not as quite as open as others.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing seems to be applying in the open source world, and we're seeing it now in the AI world where they're arguing about what's an open source AI model and what's not, depending on how much access you have to the weights and the data. So are we just going to continue to have this conversation forever, or
no? Like I said, I think using the lens of any other mature industry, open source is still sort of in its teenage years, let's say, right? As compared to auto, food, and you've heard me use these analogies forever.
I was best behaved in my teenage years. What are you talking about?
Yeah, we all were. At least we thought, right? So I think we're going through that. I mean, some people have coined, the phrase post-open to kind of represent some of these things. And I think that's an interesting way to think about it. I think, you start from the beginning with like the really dogmatic, copyleft and everything is free, the Free Software Foundation. And then you get a little bit more liberal with, Apache and some of these other things as these evolved, right? We started in this, everything should be free for the public good. But I think we've now struggled with multiple different models over the last couple of decades of companies being able to be successful building on open source, whether it's the open core model or the Red Hat providing services model. And those work to an extent, but I think now with some of these forks that we're seeing that real tension between how do we create something that is really good for a set of users to build upon, but how do we also make it in a way that is fundable, like VC fundable, because these big projects, if a company can't exist behind them, most of them won't exist on their own. Like that's not true, it's not a perfect model. In some cases they will, but in a lot of cases they're not. And I think we have to be a little bit more open to, like you said, there's different flavors of democracy. Things can be open, but still have companies behind them. And, you know, Sonatype, we've been doing this now for almost 18 years.
Yeah.
And we have a little bit of mix. You know, we have stuff that we do that's pure open source, right? We run the Maven Central repository. That's not a profit center. We spend a lot of money for that. We have Nexus open source, which is mostly an open core model because we sell Pro on top of it.
Sure.
And then we have our supply chain stuff that's pure commercial, right? So I've kind of had to live all of these different models. And so I feel like I have a unique visibility into like the dogmatic versus the purely capitalistic side.
Well, go ahead.
I wanted to ask you this question. The times that we've seen people change their licensing models, it doesn't seem to work all that well. What happened? One with high-profile case led to an acquisition. The other one retreated and came back around and said, never mind. So
Yeah.
a lot of people look at this as a signal of financial distress when these companies do that. So how would you possibly change the licensing terms after you've already established the community anyway?
Well, first of all, there are rules in open source that allow you to do this. You could take something, you know, I'll go back to the security industry. And Brian, you know this. When we first got into security, there were some fantastic open source security tools run by some fantastic people. Our friend Ron Gula at Tenable, Nessus was open source. Marty Resch's Snort, ClamAV, Nmap, and the list goes on. And they ran into the same issues that Hashi and some of these other companies are doing at today. It's not just, am I not making money or I'm not making enough money? Part of it is, hey, I'm shouldering a large percentage of the cost of maintaining this project. And then there are other people who are just taking my product, putting it under the covers and building a project on top of it. And they don't contribute anything back to the community. They're kind of
That's
parasitic.
unfortunately the norm.
Right.
You know it is.
Or they're cloud service providers that are just running the code.
They're doing it as well. And so now I'm going to disagree with you on changing licenses can be bad for business, because you know what? Ron Gula's not hurting, and neither is Marty. They've made Tenable's done pretty well, and SourceFire sold, I don't know, $2.6 billion years and years ago to Cisco.
Yeah.
So you can't, and Hashi sold for a couple $1 billion too, didn't they?
Yeah, but I think that it felt like
Mitchell.
Felt like a little bit of a distress situation.
Well, there was pressure to do something. But that being said, Brian, you said something before that's important, and that is about the cost of running a large open source project. I mean, I've had a chance, we work with a lot of the foundations within the Linux Foundation, and I've had some insight that I can't really share on here and what it costs to run some of the major CD products out there.
Yeah, for sure.
It's seven figures.
It's shocking. It was shocking to me, like that stat I shared before. I was like, wow.
No,
it's about that.
7 figures a year to maintain these things. Infrastructure.
And it's going to get worse, because, go back 20 years. It was totally the norm when I was actively coding on Maven that I would do the work. I was a release manager. I built it on my laptop.
Yeah.
The version that got included in OS X Snow Leopard was signed by my key and built on my personal laptop. That was the norm.
Right.
It was kind of cool to be able to say that.
No, it was.
Also, that was a norm. Now you look at that and go, wait, this person that I don't know just built something on hardware I can't trust? That's
and you want me to trust, right?
Right. That's not acceptable anymore. Well, okay, fine. Let's put that on a CI/CD system. Great. Who's paying for that? Right. So it's not as simple as it was 20 years ago, where the donation was my time to write some effectively text and then maybe run a short build. Now the expectations are high. They're going to be higher as we're expected.
Mission critical.
That's right. They're running more and more tools. Those things that while they're in the cloud, they're still not free. Right.
So you're telling me that this hat that he's wearing, if I pass it around, that's not going to work?
Well,
probably not.
Let's talk about, but that's the next thing I wanted to. So that's the beauty of the Linux Foundation model. A little socialism gets added to this democracy mix, right? We bring in we bring a community together around a particular open source project. And the idea is people who have the deeper pockets and have more of an investment in that project and are profiting from it, maybe they should pay a higher share of the cost of maintaining that project than a smaller company or certainly an individual or anything like that. And so that, I think that's a valuable function of what the foundations, the Linux Foundation and all these CNCFs and all the OSSF, what they all do is they try to bring that community together, not just to make the project better, but to have those who can afford to pay into it,
They're paying into the infrastructure and the governance and some of those things.
Yeah.
I think, like I said, as the world expects more and more of open source, those funds are going to become even more important.
Yes.
It may not be paying the developers.
No.
It may come to that in some cases.
Right.
But at least the infrastructure has to be covered.
What about the maintainers?
Yeah.
These maintainers, I mean, it's a thankless job in many ways.
So what do you say to using your metaphor, the radicals who go off and build a fork and then undercut those companies?
I mean, look, in democracy and freedom of speech, they're entitled to go do that.
I agree. Yeah.
Right? And if it's a better mousetrap, the market will reward them. In many cases, I don't know if it's a better mousetrap.
Yeah, in many cases it's not, because the core people that have all the knowledge, it's not just about the code base.
Right.
If you don't know anything about it, it's not very useful to you. But that's not always true. Sometimes there can be successful forks. I don't begrudge any of them. I think everybody is playing by the rules of the game.
Yeah.
And, some people will get upset about it, but I think that's how it's set up. If you don't like the model, you can fork it. And if you can muster the resources to make that successful, well, that was in the rules of the game. Right. But it's also, nobody can force a company to pay for maintenance and pay maintainers to work on something they give away for free indefinitely. And if you insist on that model, then all of these companies become unfundable, and we won't be able to have these innovative things available to us. So it cuts both ways.
I think there's also millions of forks that people don't talk about. Every company that downloads something winds up tweaking it in a way that creates some sort of...
But under open source licensing, if you change that code, you're supposed to make it you've got to make it available to the project.
Depends on the license.
I thought all OSI licenses, you had to do that.
No. The Apache one, for example, you don't have to. The copyleft ones you do, GPL,
Okay, yeah.
EL to some extent,
Yes.
LGPL.
Okay,
Yeah.
not
So
Apache.
like your democracy comment, there's the spectrum. So in some cases, it's okay. Some cases you're supposed to do that and people don't, and so that's not okay.
There's
right?
a lot of things we're supposed to do that we don't do. Right?
But let's look historically, right? The fact of the matter is, historically, companies with deep pockets like IBM or Intel, or not Microsoft, IBM or Intel, I'm drawing a blank here, but they would have certain people on their payroll who really worked on open source projects full time.
Yep.
But it was kind of I forgot the right term that you use. You serve at the what of the queen, at the
pleasure.
The pleasure. That's the word I was looking for. You served at the pleasure of IBM, and they could change their mind and say, "We don't like this project anymore."
There's
That's not a good.
yeah.
It's not sustainable.
You can't do mission critical on someone's goodwill.
That's right.
That's why you need a real.
The survey that you guys put out found that there are people getting paid by companies, but it wasn't that many. Not nearly as many as I thought.
Yeah, that was the state of the software supply chain in combination with the Tidelift data. I don't remember the percentage. It's a small percent.
Right.
However, we also found in our study this year, of the popular ecosystem, there's about 7 million components. Only about 700,000 of those are actively used, downloaded, included in projects. So it's about 10%. That's a more tractable number to try to fund.
Yeah, your head around.
Yeah, and so I think there's a decent number of those that are getting funding. And their data shows that maintainers that are paid are like 3 times more likely to do all the things we want. They have less vulnerabilities. They fix them faster.
Yep.
Right. So it shows that it works.
Yep.
It sort of boggles my mind. There was, I think it was one of the Harvard studies recently, estimated that the the outward-facing economic value of open source is something like $3 trillion. So in other words, if open source went poof, all the commercial entities worldwide would have to pony up
Have a
$3
$3
trillion
trillion
more
hole.
to fill that hole. Why can't we find 0.1% of that would cover most
All
of
of
these
it.
maintainers, right? It would be a windfall to change this game. And so the thing is, it's such a small amount proportionately that we're talking about here could really move the needle.
Mr. Capitalism, he's saying compensation drives behavior.
No, so I'm a free market person, but you know, a pure market could be brutal. Pure free market's brutal. You need a little socialism in there. But let me bring up another issue. Orphaned projects.
Mm-hmm.
I think there are a lot of projects that maybe were originally sponsored by a handful or one company who then gets bought, moves on, whatever.
Yeah.
And now you've got a whole community that's using this software and it's kind of orphaned. And, you know, in many ways, the Linux Foundation is the orphanage.
Well, yeah, as you were saying that, I was thinking of a bunch of cases where it's sort of like a cut and dump kind of model where those projects just dump them onto an open source foundation and walk away. Sometimes they're able to build a community, sometimes not. It's very hit or miss. And that's an unfortunate model where they say, you know what, we're moving on from this, so let's just.
See, so Dickens did have it right. It's Oliver Twist and please may I have another.
Right.
Thank you, sir. May I have another?
But, you know, if
Well,
those
was that Animal House?
If those companies that are dependent upon that were involved, were putting in some funding or dedicating their own engineers to get involved, they would ensure that there was a succession plan for that project, right?
Yes.
Just by being involved. And that's kind of the point here. It doesn't always have to be money, but having your engineers be involved in the projects that you're really dependent upon can change the trajectory of that. And it's illogical to me why companies would put all of their eggs in a basket that somebody else holds. That's effectively what's happening if you're using all this open source and you're not involved at all. You're at the whims of whatever things happen.
And you want to build your business around that, and you want someone to invest in that business around that.
That's right.
That's a scary prop. Hey, Brian, I appreciate you just letting us pull you in like this.
Yeah, this was fun.
It's always fun to have you on. Anything other big news, Sonatype, or you personally here at KubeCon this week?
Yeah, we're here. We have an activation zone. We're talking about open source malware. You know, we've covered this a bunch of times. Intentionally open source malware components. There's 700,000 as of a couple months ago that we've tracked. And this is an interesting stat. Remember, I told you that 10% of those open source projects, that's also 700,000. So we've crossed the point now where there are more intentionally fake, harmful components in the open source ecosystem than the ones that are actually used every day. And that's an understood milestone.
So an activation zone is a place I'm trying to avoid or go to.
No, you want to come? We've got some.
That's what they did.
You can pick between the different things and see if you found your malicious component or not.
All right.
If you're watching this, go check it out. Brian Fox, Sonatype, here on Techstrong Gang. We're going to take a break. We'll be back.
DevOps.com is the #1 online destination for DevOps education and community building. DevOps.com covers all aspects of DevOps, including DevOps best practices and tools, DevOps culture, DevSecOps, business impact, continuous testing, continuous delivery, and more. DevOps.com has the largest collection of original DevOps content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.devops.com to learn more. DevOps.com, where the world meets DevOps.
All right, folks, we're back with our final segment, and we're talking about, well, the relationship between Kubernetes and AI infrastructure. And I'm not sure people realize that most of all of these AI platforms that are out there, underneath that, at the bottom of those things, is Kubernetes. And what the next big argument about is all those platforms, whether they were built by Microsoft or whatever, are kind of do-it-yourself projects. They built it from the ground up themselves. Enterprise IT organizations don't really have that capability. So you see companies here like Nutanix is showing the next rev of their AI infrastructure platform. And they're saying that that's going to be a little more of a turnkey kind of platform. And we're not going to see necessarily so much of this do-it-yourself infrastructure approach to Kubernetes and cloud native that we saw in the previous era.
I agree with you. So it's funny, we have an interview coming up later today, Mike, with a guy named Alex Yee from its GMI Cloud, GMICloud.ai. Alex's company, and I interviewed him on Techstrong TV a few weeks ago. Alex's company is doing just that. They have pre-built GPU clusters, but on top of that metal, using cloud native Kubernetes containers, etc., they have built stacks that include all the way, like true platform as a service, right? All the way up to the building blocks of your apps, your LLMs, your trained models, your stacks to do certain common tasks within an app. And you could almost building blocks build your app like it. I do think that's the future. No one, well, not no one, but very, very, very few organizations will have the resources to train their own models. Everyone today says, yeah, I'll put it in a vector database and train it up, and I'll have my own custom LLM. Doing custom LLMs from scratch, I think, are going to be, it's a dead end.
It's hard work. I think this conversation comes full circle to our A block. I think as people start to move down these AI models, and some will be large and some will be small, the only way we're going to get to that is with some sort of centralized platform engineering approach. And I also think that part of that conversation then is also the melding of this whole ML ops framework that people use for building AI models and DevOps. And that's going to have to come together, because ultimately all those AI models are just another type of software artifact that we're putting into the application. So all of this stuff has to converge. And I'm not sure if we're all going to come up with some, platform engineering for AI methodology, or we're just going to say, hey, it's all the next generation of software engineering.
I wouldn't confuse platform engineering with, what's the right word when you have models, pre-configured models?
Well, there's the models that you get, the big LLMs, then you can either customize the LLMs or you can build a small.
No, but I think what we're going to have is there will be, and whether it's platform engineering folks doing it or not, there's going to be best practices for certain models, for certain outcomes that are not turnkey, but like they're 80% baked, and you
templates.
Just do the that's the word I was thinking. That wasn't really the word, but templates is a good substitute of the word I was thinking of. Well, you'll have these templates, and that it's 80% baked, and you just do the rest.
Prefabricated house, baby.
I think that's the future. No one wants to build from scratch.
Mm-hmm.
And quite frankly, that's the beauty of the whole cloud native model, right? You could take these containers, like literally Legos, and build your containers, into your this here, that there, and they're pre-populated too. I mean, what could be bad about that?
I think it's getting a little hard to manage. You told me this number. There's like 180 cloud native projects these days.
Yes, there are.
I think that's
on the way to 200.
Yeah.
Plus.
I think that's too hard for the average enterprise to absorb. So there needs to find some other way to consume all that in something that's easier.
But that's I don't know if you remember, it was maybe a year or two, they tried doing a flow chart of all the cloud native computing foundation projects. It looked worse than the spaghetti models on our hurricanes back home. But that being said, my grandmother used to tell me, every pot of chicken soup has a cover. She'd say some other things too, but she said that.
Okay.
I don't think you have to use all 180 models.
Or projects,
of open source. But there's so many different use cases within that tech ecosystem that I think those 180 projects represent a diversity and depth of giving you so many options in how you want to build, what you want to do. So it's a sign of health, not a sign of sickness.
I just might want somebody else to kind of make that decision and take some responsibility for it.
And you know what? That's, again, you know what a big democracy, free market person I am. Um, but that's the beauty of our system. You want to grow your own, roll your own, you can roll your own. You want to buy a pre-roll? Have I been in Colorado lately? You want to buy a pre-roll? You could buy a pre-roll.
Yeah.
That's America. Or used to be America.
So if you were going to bet, is the bulk of the market going to be more of these integrated platforms, or is it going to be the do-it-yourself, or is it going to be the small percentage, or 50-50? What's your sense of how that splits?
You know, it's going to be about using the right tool for the job. I think it's going to cut across big and small. There'll be times where a big organization says, I just need this widget. And this widget's already here. I'm going to buy that widget and use it. There'll be other times where they'll say, you know what, this is core and critical to our company. We got to own this. And they design it themselves.
All right. I'm going to vote for the 80-20 rule. 80% will
Well,
be
you can never go wrong with 80-20.
80% will be pre-integrated, and then the do-it-yourselfers will make up the other 20%. They'll be big companies then.
But I think there'll be a dumbbell of the 20%. 10% will be big companies who roll their own, and then the other 10% will be hyper small companies who want to roll their own because they want to do something they believe that's radically different.
Right. And then they're going to change their minds when they figure out how hard that is and go to the integrated
They
platform.
may very well,
We'll
or
see.
maybe they invent something new.
Yeah, we'll see.
That's the creative process. Anyway, Mike, we're off to a great start here for Techstrong Gang at KubeCon. We have a full day of live at KubeCon content coming your way. And we'll be here the rest of the week. We have Techstrong Gang from KubeCon on Thursday and Friday as well.
Yep.
As well as interviews and content all day. So stay right here by this dial, same bad time, same bad station for Techstrong Gang. On behalf of Mike Vizard and Alan Schimmel, have a great day, everyone.
Discover Techstrong Group, the epicenter of tech innovation. We're your go-to for reaching IT leaders and practitioners worldwide. Our secret? Impactful content that sparks awareness, engagement, and top-quality leads. With us, you'll access editorial websites, streaming videos, virtual events, custom content, analyst research, and more. Join our satisfied clients. Let's revolutionize your tech journey. Contact us today and tell your story to the world in the most powerful way with Techstrong Group.